Greetings and welcome. We are in Senior English A, and now our objective is to finish with Act 3 of Hamlet and move on to Act 4. Before I hit play button, one or two observations. The final scene of Act 3, that is to say, Scene 4, what I often will refer to as the lug the gut scene, because at the very end of it, Hamlet will say about his... Well, at one point, maybe, he thought of his father-in-law, now, of course, dead. He says, I'll lug the guts into a neighboring room, which shows his lack of respect. Let's point out that in this final scene, Hamlet will become a murderer. But more importantly, it's fairly clear that Hamlet begins to act. In other words, he's no longer going to talk. It's interesting, he'll speak less and do more starting from this point on. But it seems now every time he does something, it doesn't bode very well for him. He's supposed to kill the king. He had a chance to kill the king, and he didn't do it. Because he wanted to kill the king while the king was doing something immoral, therefore sending his soul to hell. So he avoids his mission of killing his uncle, right? And then turns around and commits murder, killing Polonius, the poor defenseless old man, who, although he is kind of, silly and foolish and idiotic and kind of like, likes to give advice he doesn't follow, he certainly isn't, he doesn't deserve to be stabbed behind the arrears, right? It's one of those things where he doesn't, it's a harsh judgment, if you will. Hamlet has no sense of the nasty fate which now must befall him. Maybe then proof he really is nuts. Let's begin by observing the scene, and then we'll move on to Act 4, and of course the denouement of our play, that is to say the ending of our play, all right? We are in 3-4 now.
He tell him, I'll silence thee, even here.
He tells Mama. Be direct with him.
I'll warrant you fear me not. Oh, I hear him coming.
Mother, what's the matter?
Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended.
Mother, you have my father much offended.
Come, you answer with an idle tongue.
Go, you question with a wicked tongue.
I now, Hamlet.
What's the matter now?
Have you forgot me?
No, by the road, not so. You are the queen, your husband's brother's wife. And would it were not so, you are my mother.
Yea, then I'll set those to you that can speak.
Come and sit you down, you shall not budge. You go not till I set you up a glass where you may see the inmost part of you.
What thou do there, will the murder me? Help! Help!
A rat dead for a ducat? Dead! I am slave. I know not. Is it the king?
What a rash and bloody deed is this?
A bloody deed? Almost as bad, good mother, as kill a king and marry with his brother.
As kill a king?
Aye, lady, 'twas my word. Thou wretched rash, intruding fool. Farewell. I took thee for thy better. Take thy fortune. Thou find'st to be too busy is some danger. Leave wringing of your hands. Please sit you down and let me wring your heart. For so I shall if it be made of penetrable stuff. If damned that custom of not brass, that so it be proof and bulwark against sense.
By down that thou darest wag thy tongue in noise so rude against me.
Such an act that blurs the grace and blush of modesty, calls virtue hypocrite, takes off the rose from the fair forehead of an innocent love and sets a blister there, makes marriage vows as false as dice as oaths. Oh, such a deed as from the body of contraction plucks the very soul, and sweet religion makes a rhapsody of words. Heaven's face doth glow, yet is solidity and compound mass, with tristful visage as against the doom is thought sick at the act.
Ay me, what act that draws so loud and thunders in the index?
Look here, upon this picture.
Two pictures. One is dad, one is uncle.
A counterfeit presentment of two brothers. See what a grace was seated on this brow. Hyperion's curls, the front of Jove himself, an eye like Mars to threaten or command, a station like the herald Mercury new lighted on a heaven-kissing hill, a combination and a form indeed where every god did seem to set his seal to give the world assurance of a man. This was your husband. Look you now what follows. Here is your husband, like a mildewed ear blasting his wholesome brother. Have you eyes? Could you on this fair mountain leave to feed and batten on this moor? Ah, have you eyes? eyes? You cannot call it love, for at your age the heyday in the blood is tame, it's humble and waits upon the judgment. And what judgment would step from this to this? Sense sure you have, else could you not have motion. But sure that sense is apoplexed, for madness would not earn, or sense to ecstasy was ne'er so thrall, but it reserved some quantity of choice to serve in such a difference. What devil was that thus have cozened you at hoodman blind? Eyes without feeling, feeling without sight, ears without hands or eyes, smelling sands all. Oh, but a sickly part of one true sense could not so mope. Oh, shame, where is thy blush? Rebellious hell, if thou canst mute it in the matron's bones, to flaming youth let virtue be as wax and melt in her own fire. Proclaim no shame when the compulsive other gives the charge, since frost itself as actively doth burn as reason panders will.
Oh, Hamlet, speak no more. Thou turnst mine eyes into my very soul, and there I see such black and grained spots as will not leave their tints.
Nay, but to live in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed, stewed in corruption, honeying and making love over the nasty sty.
Oh, speak to me no more. These words like daggers enter in mine ears no more, sweet Hamlet.
A murderer and a villain, a slave, that is not 20th part the tithe of your precedent lord, a vice of kings, a cutpurse of the empire and the rule, that from a shelf the precious diadem stole and put it in his pocket. A king of shreds and patches.
He gets really worked up, and then Hamlet's father's goat shows back up.
Save me, and hover on me with your wings, you heavenly gods.
Mama can't see it, though.
What would your gracious figure?
He is mad.
Do you not come your tardy son to chide? That lapsed in time and passion lets go by the important acting of your dread command? O Seminary!
Oh,
Do not forget. This visitation is but to whet thy almost blunted purpose. But look, amazement on thy mother sits. Oh, step between her and her fighting soul. Conceit in weakest bodies, strongest works. Speak to her, Hamlet.
How is it with you, lady?
alas, how is it with you that you do bend your eye on vacancy, and with the incorporeal air do hold discourse? Forth at your eyes your spirits wildly peep, and as the sleeping soldiers in the alarm, your bedded hair like life in excrement start up and stand on end. O gentle sun, upon the heat and flame of thy distemper sprinkle cool patience. Whereunto you look?
On him, look you how pale he glares. His form and cause conjoined, preaching to stones would make them capable. Do not look upon me, lest with this piteous action you convert my stern effects. Then what I have to do will want true colour. Tears, perchance, for blood.
To whom do you speak this?
Do you see nothing there?
Nothing at all in all that is I see.
Nor do you nothing here?
No, nothing but ourselves.
Why, look you there, look how it steals away. My father in his habit as he lived. Look where he goes, even now, out at the portal.
This is the very coinage of your brain, this bodiless creation. Ecstasy is very cunning.
Ecstasy. My pulse as yours, doth temperately keep time and makes us helpful music. It is not madness that I have uttered. Bring me to the test, and either matter will reword which madness would gamble for. Mother, for love of grace, lay not a flattering unction to your soul, and not your trespass, but my madness speaks. It will the skin and film the ulcerous place, whilst rank corruption mining all within infects unseen. Confess yourself to heaven. Repent what's past. Avoid what is to come. And do not spread the compost on the weeds to make them ranker. Forgive me this, my virtue. For in the fatness of these pursy times, virtue itself of vice must pardon, beg, yea, curb, and woo for leave to do him good.
Oh, Hamlet, thou hast cleft my heart in twain.
Oh. Throw away the worser part of it, and live the purer with the other half. Good night. But go not to my uncle's bed. Assume a virtue if you have it not. That monster custom, who all sense doth eat of habits evil, is angel yet in this, that to the use of actions fair and good, he likewise gives a frock or livery that aptly is put on, refrained night. And that shall lend a kind of easiness to the next abstinence, the next more easy. For use almost can change the stamp of nature, and I that quell the devil will throw him out with wondrous potency. Once more, good night. And when you are desirous to be blessed, I will blessing beg of you. For this same Lord I do repent, but heaven hath pleased it so
Polonius
to punish me with this and this with me, that I must be their scourge and minister. I will bestow him, and will answer well the death I gave him. So, again, good night. I must be cruel, only to be kind. Thus bad begins, and worse remains behind. One word more, good lady.
What shall I do?
Not this, by no means, that I bid you do. Let the bloat king tempt you again to bed, pinch wanton on your cheek, call you his mouse, and let him for a pair of reachy kisses, or paddling in your neck with his damned fingers, make you to ravel all this matter out, that I essentially am not in madness, but mad in craft. 'Twere good you let him know, for who that's but a queen, fair, sober,
Says, tell my, go ahead and tell my uncle, I don't care. Tell him I'm not crazy.
Dear concerning side, who would do so? No, in despite of sense and secrecy, unpeg the basket on the house's top, let the birds fly, and like the famous ape, to try conclusions in the basket, creep and break your own neck down.
Be thou assured.
She says, I won't tell.
Words been made of breath and breath of life.
She says, I won't give you up.
I have no life to breathe what thou hast said to me.
I must to England. You know that?
And I had forgot, 'tis so concluded on.
Those letters sealed, and my two schoolfellows, whom I will trust as I will adders fanged, they bear the mended. They must sweep my way and marshal me to knavery. Let it work, for 'tis the sport to have the engineer hoist with his own petard, and shall go hard, but I will delve 1 yard below their minds and blow them at the moon. Oh, 'tis most...
He says, I'll get R&G. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern.
Two crafts directly meet. This man shall set me packing. I will land the guts into the naval room. Mother, good night. Indeed, this counsellor is now most still, most secret, and most grave, that was in life a foolish, prating knave.
It's interesting that at the end of this act, Hamlet will say about Polonius that he was a fool, that he was a prating. That means he was always involved in other people's business. He got his nose stuck in a wrong corner, and for it, Hamlet says he got jacked. There seems to be in Hamlet's mind some legitimacy that old man Polonius maybe deserves to get what he gets. I'll just pause here and say that the great Viennese psychiatrist Sigmund Freud had a whole lot to say about Shakespeare's plays, but especially this play. And he commented several times about the fact that there is this interesting transference that seems to happen, where Hamlet gets really mad at one person, but he takes it out on another person. Of course, Freud will point this out, and then in the 20th century, this becomes kind of common parlance in psychology, that very regularly, people will act out towards person A, because they're actually not mad at person A at all, but rather mad at person B. But person A receives the brunt of the negative energy. And you can have a sense that Hamlet's probably upset at Polonius, but one of the reasons he's upset at Polonius is, of course, because he's so upset at, well, look who walks onto the stage, and for one. The mother is left crying. Hamlet will pull Polonius off stage. And this is one of those moments in Shakespeare when acts are very fluid. You don't have an identifiable, the curtain goes down and then back up. You really are just continuing, and in this regards, it's almost like Act 3 just continues right into Act 4. The queen is left crying. The king comes onto the stage and wants to know what's going on. Let's now work through Act 4 real quickly. And in 4:1, he will ask Gertrude, what's wrong? Notice, to continue the theme of women lying or being dishonest. The queen will come right out and say, well, Hamlet's lost his mind. She knows Hamlet now is not crazy. Hamlet just told her, I'm actually just faking madness. I'm not really crazy. But go ahead and tell my uncle stepfather if you want to, because I'm coming after him. And here, the queen will defend her boy. He's crazy, and he stabbed old man Polonius behind the curtain. Notice what the king says right away. It would have been so with us if we had been there. The king is shrewd. Claudius is a shrewd criminal and immediately identifies, if I had been there behind the curtains, as I was earlier when Ophelia and Hamlet were going at it, I might have been the one killed. Ergo, I got to send this kid away, and I got to do it fast. To that degree, he will immediately make plans to send Hamlet away to England, where he will ask England to kill Hamlet. Now, he's going to do this through the form of a letter. He's going to write a letter, and he's going to give the letter to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who will then attend Hamlet on the boat headed towards England. The idea is simple. When the two arrive, they don't know what's in the letter. Hamlet doesn't know what's in the letter. The two of them are instructed, take young Hamlet to the King of England and hand this letter. When he opens the letter, he will immediately read that the young man Hamlet is to have his head chopped off. That's the plan, and Claudius will put that plan together really quickly. Remember earlier he said, madness and great ones must not unwatched go, and now we've got proof of it. He's killed the second in command. Of course, think about the problems for Claudius in regards to this killing. What are those problems? What's the most obvious problem in regards to Hamlet killing Polonius? For Claudius, for the king? Yeah, backlash in what way? You're absolutely right, Keely. There's going to be an obvious backlash. Backlash from whom? Who's going to challenge Claudius in regards to the killing of Polonius?
Well, he's going to get blamed.
Well, yeah, I mean the king is the one in charge. Let me get this straight. Let me get this straight. You let some lunatic run around the castle, and the next thing we know, he stabbed an old man behind the curtains. What kind of show are you running? You can obviously see the concern, but it goes deeper than that. Claudius realizes Polonius has children, right? The first one, of course, is his son, who has, where is Laertes? Laertes is away, going to school in France. When Laertes hears that daddy got stabbed to death by Hamlet, obviously Laertes' first question will not be at Hamlet. His first question will be at the king. So obviously the king's got issues. Of course, Polonius has a daughter, right? Ophelia. And so there's going to be the obvious issue of how do you respond to Ophelia. Some of you have maybe already pointed out in your notes, wait a minute, Daddy said don't talk to Hamlet. And if Daddy were to say today, for example, to a young lady who had a father and a mother, and Daddy were to say, you will not see him, you will not smell him, you will not talk to him, the natural inclination might be, well, that's what Dad says, but I'm going to go talk to Mom and get the real story. I'm going to find out if that's for real or not. Where is Ophelia's mama? And it's fairly self-evident she is not in the play. She is already passed. Ophelia has no mother. So in the killing of Polonius now, and the departure of her brother to France, Ophelia is now left completely alone. This will come into play in Act 4. But we're not done. One of the real and probably biggest challenges for Claudius has to do with his own wife, Hamlet's mother. That is to say, in a normal situation, this would be a no-brainer. You would take Hamlet outside the castle walls, you'd put a bullet in his brain and put him in a hole and bury him. That's it. An eye for an eye. It's done. He killed the old man. He shouldn't have done it. It's a murder. It's simple. We have a witness. Done. The only problem is, for Claudius, the one who's the witness is the woman who he loves, who just also happens to be the mother of the murderer. And to that degree, he's got to invent a plan where he will say to Queen Gertrude, we have to protect your son. We're going to send him away to England and let him live there for a while. right? And then he's going to send this letter to England to say, take off Hamlet's head. And of course, there will be some story contrived for Mama, like, I don't know what happened, but there was some miscommunication, and poor Hamlet, your boy, ended up killing himself or dying or something. I don't know. We'll get into it later. And then, of course, he would hope that everything could go back to normal. Let's continue. Yeah, whatever is normal, right, in this play. Let's go to 4-2 now. Hamlet comes back on stage, and he says, all right, I've hid the body. I've hid the corpse of Polonius. And Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have been sent to find Hamlet and, of course, the body. They will ask him, Hamlet, where is the body? He will say some interesting kind of word games. He will call Rosencrantz and Guildenstern a sponge or a nut like a monkey would keep in the corner of its jaw, just waiting to be chewed on and spit out. Then notice they'll ask, you must tell us where the body is, 4-2. You must tell us where the body is and go with us to the king. Interestingly now, Hamlet will play increasingly word games. For those of you that like jokes and word games and riddles, this is your play. Especially starting now. Many of the lines of Hamlet have double and even triple meanings. Look what he says at line 30 or so of 4-2. He says, the body is with the king, but the king is not with the body. The king is a thing, and then Guildenstern will say, a thing of nothing. Now, I'll break it down real quickly, and it makes total sense. Remember earlier, Hamlet, thou hast thy father much offended. Mother, you have my father much offended. We're playing games between two different fathers. Notice here, he will say about Polonius's body, the body is with the king. What does that mean?
The spirit's with the real king.
That's right. King Hamlet's, of course, under the ground, just as Polonius now is. But the king is not with the body. Now, what does that mean? Of course, Claudius isn't dead yet. The king is a thing of nothing. Who's he talking about there? Which king is he talking about? Well, think, it makes sense, both of them. His father is a ghost. Earlier in the play, they tried to stab him with something to try and show that he was there. Nothing. He's a ghost, right? He's immaterial, and to that degree, he's nothing. Of course, Claudius is also a king of nothing. And to that degree, now we finish and go to 4-3. Here in 4-3, we will have King speaking with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They're like, dude, this kid is whack. There is absolutely no way to make out heads or tails of what it is he has to say. Onto the stage will come Hamlet, and immediately the king will say, Hamlet, where is Polonius? Polonius, and Hamlet now is very jovial. He's lighthearted as he says, oh, Polonius, he's at supper. What do you mean at supper? Claudius, I thought he was dead. Oh no, he is at supper right now. A certain convocation of politic worms eat at him even now. He's at supper. He's the main dinner feast, the main meal for maggots. Maggots are already starting to eat on him. Well, of course, we understand once you get buried under the ground, sooner or later, this is kind of what happens to you, right? I mean, this whole thing of worms come out to take care of you. At the end, worms get to you, maggots. Notice the king, he says, not where he's eaten, but where he's eaten, a certain convocation of politics, worms are eaten at him. Your worm, I'm at line 22 or so of 4-3. Your worm is your only emperor for diet. Now, for your notes, this is beautiful philosophy, Nelson. You'll love this. Shakespeare is going to have Hamlet show us how death is the great equivocator, the great balancer, the great equalizer, right? Remember that for Shakespeare's audience, I'll work on my whiteboard for just a second. For Shakespeare's audience, even though they might not actually know much Aristotle, they knew the name, a famous philosopher from the Greek epoch and that kind of thing. What they understood about Aristotle, without knowing maybe that it was Aristotle, was the idea that all of the world was understood in a pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid we put the gods. Next we put men. Next we put women, and then of course we put, you know, servants and all that kind of stuff, right? You know, beasts of burden and stuff like that, right? Now, this was understood to be totally natural, in the same way that Ruthie's tree out there is what it is, and it's not a Christmas tree. To scream at that tree and say, I want you to be a Christmas tree, would be a mark of insanity. No, you don't understand. That tree can't ever become a Christmas tree. It is what it is by its nature. And everyone in Shakespeare's day believed this as well. In regards to the men, however, there was a class system where we had upper class and it kind of went down to middle class and then ultimately to lower class. Do you got me? So, for example, in our play, King Claudius is a king and therefore he sits right beneath the gods. Hamlet is a prince and therefore he sits right beneath the king. Do you got me? So there's like this hierarchy involved, okay? Hamlet will make a joke. He will say, funny thing about maggots, don't seem to care much about Aristotle. They don't care whether you're a king or you're a beggar. When you're in the ground, maggots don't seem to care. Death happens to everybody. The upper class and the lower class. It doesn't matter. Notice how he says it. He says, your worm is your only emperor for diet. And then he says something really interesting, Mr. Brown. Follow this philosophy. We fat all creatures. We feed creatures, else to fat us. And we fat ourselves for maggots. You're driving along the side of the road. You look out at the cow and you go, oh, poor cow. Man, it would really suck to be a cow because all you're doing is standing out in a meadow, eating lots of grass so that you can become a Big Mac for me. But see, here's the funny thing. Shakespeare says, you haven't finished the story. What if the cow could talk? The cow would look back at you and say, oh, isn't that funny? That stupid person thinks that he's feeding me so that I can become a Big Mac for him. But what I'm really doing is feeding him so that he can become a Big Mac for maggots. Who's stupid now? See, that's the continuation of it. We fat everybody, we fat other creatures. We feed cows so we can make Big Macs. But funny thing is, it doesn't occur to us, we're feeding our own bodies so that maggots someday have something to eat on. Your worm is your only emperor. In the end, the most powerful critter on the planet is a maggot. Why? Because it gets last cuisine. It gets to eat last. Of course, it's funny about fishing and worms, because if you want to go catch a fish, you go and get a worm, and you stick him on the end of a hook so that you can get a fish, so that you can eat that fish, so that ultimately you can die, so that another worm can eat you. What a strange way to think about what you learned from Disney and The Lion King, that great circle of life motif, right? Of course, Disney didn't invent that idea. Aristotle, in many ways, made it popular. That idea that we all kind of come full circle and everything comes full circle. Notice how he finishes. Your fat king and your lean beggar is but veritable service. 2 dishes, but to 1 table. That's the end. Everybody ends up being food for maggots. Notice the king. Alas, alas, poor Hamlet, he's lost his mind. In other words, the king can't get it. A thinking audience will recognize these are not the ravings of a lunatic. These are fairly interesting observations about the ways in which Hamlet is already starting to think about death and dying. Hamlet will continue. A man may fish with the worm that hath ate of a king, and eat of the fish that hath fed of that worm. Interesting. So, for example, a great and mighty king dies, goes into the ground. Maggots eat him. An old pauper, beggar, comes along, looks for a worm, takes up the worm out of the ground that just got through eating of a king, sticks it on the end of a hook, goes out and goes fishing. Interesting. The king will say, what do you mean by this? To which Hamlet's response is, nothing but to show you how a king may go a progress through the guts of a beggar. In other words, in the end, the food that you eat comes from the ground, predominantly. In some way or another, it's almost all dirt of some kind or another that's grown or whatever, right? Notice the king, where is Polonius? I'm not interested in word games anymore. Hamlet will come back. Earlier he said he was at supper. Now he says he's in heaven. Polonius is in heaven. Send thither to see. You can go to heaven. If your messenger find Polonius not in heaven, seek him in the other place yourself. Whoa! What's he just said to his stepdaddy? Yeah, he goes, Polonius is in heaven. You can send one of your pals. Why don't you send Rosencrantz to go find him? Oh, by the way, if Rosencrantz can't find him in heaven, why don't you go to hell and find him there? Whoa! More word games. To which Polonius, Hamlet will then he will say, but indeed, if you find him not within this month, you'll nose him as you go up the stairs into the lobby. What does that mean? Yeah, you're going to start smelling him pretty soon. He's just out, he's out there. The king sends away, go find it, go find Polonius. Hamlet, this deed for thine especial safety, which that we do tender, we dearly grieve that which was done. He says, boy, I'm going to have to send you away. Hamlet goes, good. The king looks in his face and says, you knew what we were going to do to you, you wouldn't say good. Hamlet says, I see it, right here. You're giving too much away. And then he says, farewell, loving mother. And he steps towards Uncle Claudius, king, and he wants to hug him. Farewell, loving mother. Claudius is like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm not your mother. I'm your father. Man and wife are one flesh, he says, and therefore, my mother. And he gives him a hug. Claudius is just like, this kid's got to go down. We're taking care of this boy. Scene 4. I told you there's a soliloquy in each one of the previous scenes, and there were. And of course, the to be or not to be soliloquy is the most important one in Act 3. We now come to the soliloquy of 4-4, and it's an interesting and easy mnemonic, 4-4. Hamlet is going to stand on stage. Now, for your notes, sometimes this scene is edited out of performances of Hamlet. If the story about the young man, Fortinbras, is also edited out of the story. For example, if you watch the Mel Gibson version of Hamlet, there is no mention of this scene. And the reason is simple. Because they edit out all of the mention of that young kid named Fortinbras, who we hear right at the very beginning. Who's that young kid who, because he found out King Hamlet was dead, was going to march against Denmark and try and take back lands. Claudius mentions that he's got to send some ambassadors to solve the problem. We find out by the second act that those ambassadors have returned from Norway and everything is cool. But there's been an agreement that will allow for Fortinbras and his young soldier troops to march against Poland. And they're going to march through Denmark to get to Poland. And that's kind of the agreement or whatever. This scene allows Hamlet to stand and watch a bunch of young soldiers from Norway marching towards Poland. And Hamlet will ask about them. Now, the way Shakespeare would do this is he had about 20 guys dressed up as soldiers. And they just walked off onto the stage at a corner of the stage, onto the stage, off to the stage, onto the stage, off the stage. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, it looks like there's hundreds of these guys when in fact there's just 20 of them. They just keep walking in a big circle, on stage, off stage, which allows for Hamlet then to comment while they're walking. He's able to say something interesting about them. And he will point out, he will ask a soldier standing next to him, well, where are all these guys going? Hamlet's about to get on a boat and go to England. Where are all these guys going? Oh, we're going to fight a little war over in Poland. Really? Well, there's a lot of guys. This must be a serious fight for a lot of land. No, actually, we're going to fight for a piece of ground nobody actually even wants. Hamlet's like, you're kidding me. Nope, that's what we're doing. We're all going to fight for the stupidity of a piece of ground. Shakespeare here could be making the point politically that oftentimes big wars get fought over stupid little things. And it's a significant thing to go back and ask the question in the history of the world. The largest wars, World War II, World War I, the big wars, the Civil War. What was the one thing that finally started it? Interestingly, often it's kind of almost an insignificant thing that then leads to these big conflicts, leaving ultimately Hamlet alone. I'm on line, I'm at 4-4, roughly line 33 or so. This is the how all occasions do inform against me soliloquy. Hamlet will point out two things, write in your notes. One, he will say, I'm watching men go off to die for a piece of ground nobody wants. And yet, they're willing to go and die. Why can't I have the courage to do what I have to do? Number two, but Hamlet realizes I'm about to get on a boat and sail away from Denmark. The obvious question is, how's he going to get the king, Claudius, in revenge on the king, if he's sailing away towards England? This is obviously a complication in the plot. This soliloquy will end with the lines, rightly to be great, roughly line 53 or so. Rightly to be great, 4-4. Rightly to be great is not to stir without great argument, but greatly to find quarrel in a straw when honor's at the stake. You have to fight when your honor has been challenged.